Most families today depend on a food system they do not control. Food travels thousands of miles, is harvested early, and is grown for transport, not for nutrition. This is already affecting your health. Not immediately, but slowly, consistently. At the same time, food prices continue rising, and most home gardens are not designed to replace that dependency. They produce occasionally, then stop. The difference is already happening. Some gardens are producing food every week of the year. Others fail after one season and reset to zero. The difference is not climate. It is not land. It is not budget. It is system design. A $100 garden built as decoration will fail. A $100 garden built as infrastructure will feed a family for years. One creates temporary harvests. The other creates long-term food security. This is where the separation begins. Most people build gardens the same way. Buy soil, plant randomly, water when needed, fix problems after they appear. This is not a system. This is reaction. Every season starts from zero. Every problem requires buying something new. Every mistake compounds. Over time, costs increase, while yields remain unstable. A high-yield year-round garden operates differently. It is built on three foundations: soil that improves itself, crops that support each other, a structure that produces continuously. Once these are in place, the system stabilizes. Less effort, more output. 1. Permanent soil system. Soil determines everything. Healthy soil grows food. Dead soil grows problems. Compost core fertility does not come from stores. Use kitchen scraps, leaves, and grass to build compost. Waste becomes nutrients. The system feeds itself. Buried wood beds, moisture battery. Water loss limits yield. Bury rotting wood under beds to store moisture. Soil stays hydrated for weeks, even in heat. Mulch layer, bare soil loses life quickly. Cover soil with leaves or straw at all times. Moisture stabilizes, microbial life multiplies. This is the foundation. Without it, nothing else works. With it, everything improves. 2. Low-cost startup, under $100. Most people overspend at the beginning. Effective systems invest only in leverage. Simple budget breakdown. Seeds, 10 to 15. Basic containers, wood, bricks, $20 to $30. Soil improvement materials, $20 water setup, buckets, hose, $20. Misc, tools, trays, $10, total under $100. This is not a limitation. It forces efficiency. Every dollar builds the system, not temporary results. 3. Year-round framework. A productive garden does not stop. Gaps in production are system failures. Succession planting. Empty space produces nothing. Plant new crops before old ones finish. Harvests overlap continuously. Temperature protection, extreme heat or cold stops growth. Use simple covers, shade, or recycled materials. Production continues when others fail. Crop rotation. Repeating crops weakens soil. Rotate plant families across beds. Soil remains balanced long-term. At this point, the system begins to separate. One garden reacts, the other produces. A high-yield garden is not a collection of vegetables. It is a structured ecosystem. Most gardens are designed around preference. Effective systems are designed around function. Each plant has a role: production, protection, or regeneration. When plants are arranged correctly, they reduce input, stabilize growth, and extend harvest windows. When arranged randomly, they compete, attract pests, and exhaust the soil. This is where most systems break. They focus on growing plants instead of building relationships between them. 4. Core food crops, output layer. These are the primary food sources. They provide consistent, repeatable harvests. Leafy greens. Fast production creates stability. Plant small batches every 1 to 2 weeks. Harvest continues across all seasons. Root crops. They use underground space efficiently, sow between other crops without expanding area. Total yield increases per square meter. Legumes. They feed both the system and the soil. Integrate regularly across all beds. Nitrogen levels increase naturally over time. These crops form the backbone. Without them, output is inconsistent. With them, production stabilizes. 5. Protective crops, balance layer. Pest control is not a product. It is a system outcome. Balanced gardens require fewer interventions. Aromatic herbs, strong scent disrupts pest behavior. Plant around vegetables, not separately. Damage decreases without chemicals. Flowering plants. Pollinators increase production. Distribute flowers throughout beds. Fruit yield improves naturally. Ground cover plants. Bare soil creates imbalance. Keep soil covered between crops. Moisture and fertility remain stable. Protection is built in, not added later. 6. Space multiplication, yield expansion. Most gardens waste space, not because of size, but because of design. A high-yield system uses every layer. Vertical growth. Climbing crops increase output per square meter. Use simple trellises or strings. Production expands upward, not outward. Layered planting. Single-layer planting limits yield. Combine tall, medium, and ground crops. Multiple harvests occur in the same space. Edge utilization. Edges are often unused. Plant fast-growing crops along borders. Total output increases without extra cost. This is where yield multiplies. The same space produces more without more input. For 7, continuous harvest system. Most gardens produce once, then stop. A system produces continuously. Staggered planting. Single planting creates a single harvest. Plant in intervals. Harvest spreads across weeks, not days. Regrowth crops. Some plants regrow after cutting. Harvest leaves, not entire plants. Production extends without replanting. Immediate replanting. Empty space is lost production. Replant immediately after harvest. Cycles overlap continuously. Continuity creates stability. Stable output creates food security. Health factor. Why this system matters. Most food is optimized for storage, not nutrition. Crops are harvested early. Soil is depleted. Chemical inputs replace biological processes. This reduces mineral density over time. A home system changes this. Fresh harvest contains more nutrients. Soil-built systems produce stronger crops. Chemical exposure is reduced. Health improves gradually and consistently. At this level, the system begins to shift. You are no longer growing food. You are controlling quality. But control requires structure. Without management, even strong systems decline. The next step determines long-term stability. A system without management slowly breaks down, not because of major failure, but because of small inconsistencies repeated over time. Most gardens are not lost in a single moment. They weaken gradually. Watering becomes irregular. Harvesting becomes delayed. Problems are noticed too late. A high-yield garden removes this pattern. It replaces reaction with structure. It replaces guesswork with routine. This is where stability is built. 8. Water control system. Water is not about how much, it is about how consistent. Inconsistent watering creates stress. Stressed plants reduce yield and nutrition. Deep watering. Shallow watering creates shallow roots. Water deeply at longer intervals. Roots grow deeper, increasing drought resistance. Morning timing. Evaporation increases with heat. Water early in the day. Moisture remains available longer. Moisture retention. Water loss reduces output more than pests. Maintain thick mulch on every bed. Water frequency drops while stability increases. Water becomes controlled, not reactive. 9. Low-cost protection system. Most people solve problems after they appear. Effective systems reduce them before they spread. Baking soda spray. Fungal issues spread silently. Mix baking soda, water, and a small amount of soap. Leaves remain protected at minimal cost. Plant diversity. Uniform planting attracts pests. Mix crops within the same bed. Damage stays localized and manageable. Daily observation problems grow when ignored. Check plants briefly each day. Early action prevents escalation. Protection is built into the system, not added as a response. 10. Harvest management. Harvesting is not the end of the cycle. It is part of production. Incorrect harvesting reduces future output. Frequent harvesting. Overgrown plants slow production. Harvest regularly, even small amounts. Plants continue producing. Selective cutting. Removing entire plants stops growth. Harvest outer leaves or mature sections. The plant remains active. Immediate replacement harvest creates empty space. Replant immediately. Production cycles remain continuous. Harvesting becomes a tool, not an endpoint. 11. Time-based system. Most gardens depend on memory. Systems depend on schedule. Time structure creates consistency. Weekly routine. Irregular action creates irregular results. Set fixed days for key tasks. Consistency stabilizes output. Monthly adjustment conditions change slowly. Adjust spacing, crops, or coverage. The system adapts instead of failing. Seasonal preparation. Waiting creates gaps. Prepare the next cycle in advance. Transitions become seamless. Time becomes an advantage, not a limitation. Health impact, consistency over time. Health is not improved in a single harvest. It is built through repeated exposure to better food. Consistent harvests replace inconsistent store purchases. Fresh crops contain higher nutrient density. Reduced chemical exposure lowers long-term risk. The change is gradual, but it compounds. At this stage, the system begins to stabilize. Problems decrease. Output becomes predictable. Costs stop increasing. But one factor determines whether the system grows or stays limited. Expansion, not by size, by efficiency. A garden becomes powerful when it produces more without requiring more. Most systems expand by adding space, tools, and inputs. Effective systems expand by compounding what already exists. This is where small gardens begin to outperform larger ones, not through size, but through efficiency built over time. Every cycle either builds the next or resets to zero. A high-yield system never resets. 12. Seed self-sufficiency. Dependency begins with inputs. Seeds are the first layer. A system that buys seeds every season remains dependent. A system that produces seeds becomes self-sufficient. Basic seed saving. Seeds are future production. Allow selected plants to fully mature. Each harvest becomes the next planting cycle. Selection pressure. Weak plants create weak systems. Save seeds only from strong, healthy plants. Each generation becomes more adapted. Storage stability. Poor storage destroys viability. Keep seeds dry, cool, and protected. Supply remains reliable across seasons. Seed saving removes recurring cost. It transforms one season into many. 13. Soil regeneration loop. Most gardens use soil. Effective systems build it. Soil is not consumed, it is developed. Closed compost loop. Organic waste is unused fertility. Return all plant material to compost. Soil improves continuously without external input. Chop and drop, removing plant material exports nutrients. Cut and leave residues on the bed. Nutrients cycle back into the system. Minimal disturbance. Disturbance breaks soil structure. Avoid deep digging whenever possible. Biological activity strengthens over time. Healthy soil reduces every other problem. Less water needed, fewer pests, stronger, more nutrient-dense crops. 14. Microclimate control. Yield is limited by exposure. Control exposure, and production extends. Most gardens fail during extremes. Systems remain stable. Wind reduction. Wind increases evaporation and stress. Use barriers or dense planting. Growth remains consistent. Shade management. Excess heat slows production. Use shade cloth or positioning. Crops continue through hot periods. Heat retention. Cold nights reduce growth speed. Use stones, water containers, or covers. Temperature stabilizes across cycles. Microclimates turn risk into control. Control extends growing seasons. 15. Stacking production. Single cycles limit output. Stacked cycles multiply it. Fast, slow crops. Slow crops waste early space. Add fast-growing crops between them. Harvest begins early and continues longer. Overlap planting. Waiting creates gaps. Plant the next crop before the current one finishes. Production becomes continuous. Perennial integration. Annual crops reset every year. Add perennial plants where possible. They produce with minimal ongoing effort. Stacking removes downtime. The system remains active at all times. Health multiplier, compound effect. Health improvements are not immediate. They accumulate. Soil quality improves nutrient density. Fresh harvest preserves vitamins. Reduced chemical exposure lowers long-term risk. Over time, the difference becomes measurable, not just in yield, but in resilience. At this level, the system changes completely. It no longer depends on external inputs. It no longer resets between seasons. It no longer produces in cycles. It produces continuously. The cost remains low. The output increases each cycle. This is where most systems separate. Some remain dependent. Others become self-sufficient. One final factor determines which path is taken: time. Time determines the outcome before results appear, not because of effort, but because systems require cycles to mature. A high-yield year-round garden does not begin at full capacity. It builds toward it. Soil needs time to develop biological activity. Crop systems need cycles to stabilize balance. Management routines need repetition to become consistent. Those who begin earlier enter stability sooner. Those who delay remain in the unstable phase longer. This is the difference that compounds. A garden is not built in a single action. It is assembled in layers. Soil system builds fertility. Crop system creates balance. Management system stabilizes output. Regeneration system removes dependency. Time multiplies all of them. When these layers connect, the system becomes self-sufficient. At that point, effort decreases while production continues. 16. Full system integration. Separate actions create inconsistency. Integrated systems create control. Soil plus water. Healthy soil holds moisture. Watering becomes less frequent. Both systems reduce dependency together. Crops plus protection. Diverse planting reduces pest pressure. Intervention becomes minimal. Balance replaces correction. Harvest replanting. Harvest creates space. Immediate replanting maintains output. Production never stops. Integration converts effort into efficiency. Without integration, work increases. With integration, work decreases over time. 17. Failure patterns and how systems remove them. Failure is predictable. It follows repeated patterns. Systems eliminate those patterns. Starting too large. Large systems collapse without structure. Begin with a controlled area. Expand only after stability is proven. Inconsistent action. Irregular effort produces unstable results. Follow a fixed routine. Consistency replaces correction. Chasing perfection. Perfection delays progress. Build functional systems first. Optimization comes later. Failure is not random. It is the absence of structure. 18. Long-term shift. At the beginning, the garden requires effort. Later, it requires observation. At the beginning, output is limited. Later, it becomes continuous. At the beginning, costs exist. Later, costs decrease. This shift does not happen suddenly. It happens through cycles. Each cycle strengthens the next. Each improvement compounds. Final principle. Control of food, control of health. Food grown at home is harvested at full maturity. It retains more nutrients. Soil-built systems produce stronger crops. They contain higher mineral density. Chemical exposure is reduced. Long-term health risk decreases. Over time, the difference becomes visible, not immediately, but consistently. There are only two paths, one where food is controlled externally and one where production is controlled internally. One depends on fluctuating systems. The other builds stability. The cost is not the barrier. The system is simple. The structure is proven. The only variable is when it begins. Every delay extends dependence. Every cycle started now builds future security. A system started today will produce months from now. A system delayed today will not exist when it is needed.